Hello from the Woody Hayes Athletic Center. Dave, I was pretty confident that we would be here today. Well, one of these days this week. I didn't think we would be having the conversations we were having. I thought we'd be talking signing day, this class Ohio State's put together. We did talk a little bit about that with Ryan Day, but that was not most of what we talked about in there, nor what we will talk about here after the Buckeyes lost to Michigan on Saturday. I know you have done a lot of discussion on the BM5, including this morning with Steve, about the game in general. So let's kind of keep it to what Ryan Day said. Let's start with a couple pointed questions that were asked of him. Does he feel he's the guy to lead this program? Does he expect to be back next year? Those things, the answers are what you expect, I assume, in terms of him saying yes. But what did you make of kind of the way he responded to some of those questions?
Yeah, I know. I mean, everybody, rightfully so, was disappointed in Ryan Day. I did like, and I think if you guys haven't watched the press conference yet, you guys are going to like that he owned it. He could have been, when somebody asked him a question like, are you going to be the coach at Ohio State next year? He could have been like, why are you even asking me that? Yeah, but he wasn't defensive. He would even say things like,
I understand why you're asking.
Yeah, there was even other tough questions that people would ask, and he'd say, I completely understand why you're. I'd ask the same thing if I was in your shoes. So, like, I like that he owned it. Like, but he said, yes, I'm going to be back. And he explained why he's the right man for the job, even though he says, I understand why you're asking that. And he was asked a lot about, did you feel like you didn't adjust enough? Which it's understandable they wanted to run the ball against Michigan, right? If you win the rushing battle, you're going to win the game. But when that wasn't working, they didn't adjust. And instead of being defensive about it, he admitted, he's like, yeah, we should have thrown on the perimeter more. Yes, we ran up the middle too often. We had too many interior runs. He owned all of that, and I liked that. So, yeah, I mean, did you feel the same way that he – and just so you guys know, like the first 20 minutes of the press conference was like all recruiting, and that was predetermined. We were told the first 12 minutes would be recruiting questions, then we could ask anything. So at the 20-minute mark, I'm thinking, oh, man, if we only get him for a half hour, not good. We ended up getting him for 55 minutes, close to an hour. So the last, that's a good, 35 minutes that we talked just about what happened and looking forward, like rallying the troops. But did you feel like he kind of went out of his way to own it and not make excuses? And
yes, I think the issue is that you're on year 4 of this now.
Yeah.
And they have made changes. And so I understand as Buckeye fans that even if your coach is owning it, it's falling a little bit on deaf ears until you get the job done.
Of course.
I thought one of the most important questions was asked about can the Michigan game be too big? Can you make it too big?
Especially in this era, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I think coming out of this game. And I think every year we've kind of had a different reason for why, right? And obviously looking back on some of the cheating scandals and whatnot. But the way that Ryan talked about his dad and how this was the second worst thing basically that's ever happened in these losses. You and I stood here last week and talked about that in a very positive way. But I do wonder if it made it so much for these guys that they couldn't lose. And so they had to play a different way than they did against Indiana, against Penn State, even against Oregon in a loss. Because this wasn't a talented Michigan team like the last few years.
Right.
This wasn't a Michigan team that knew your signals. This was a Michigan team that you were way better than. And I do think that question was relevant. And I thought Coach Day answered it in as good of a way as to be expected, because I don't know how else you say, until you win the game, you can't say that you got it, right?
Yeah, and I do feel like they were far too tight. He pushed back on the idea that they were tight to begin the game. He felt that they came out loose. And he said as the game got close and we got further in the game, he admitted they got tight. And he admitted, again, that they should have been throwing the perimeter more. I mean, Jeremiah Smith didn't have any targets in the second half. That's insane.
He did. He had 2, actually.
Oh,
I don't know why this keeps going.
Oh, okay.
He had 2 targets on back-to-back plays in the third quarter, including a catch. Did he have enough? I think is a very, very legitimate question.
I don't know why I missed that. I thought for some reason he didn't have any. My apologies. He had 2. I believe my partner here. So
he had 2 early in the third quarter, but then some of it I think was Michigan, but I also think some of it was poor game plan.
Yeah, and he admitted that. So they needed to throw the perimeter more. They needed to quit running up the middle every time on first down. They just didn't make the adjustments. And again, I understand going into the game saying we have to run the ball, But when that is not working, they easily could have won this game, been the first team in forever to win the game without winning the rushing battle. The only way they would have lost this game is doing what they did. And I know and we even somebody in the chat, Ryan Day did not miss 2 field goals. I get that. But, like, I keep comparing the game to 1996. They made their field goals in 96, and they still lost because they had first and goal 3 times in the first half in 96 and settled for field goals each time. You can't settle for field goals in this game. You can't settle for field goal attempts. And when you have a field goal kicker that's already shanked one short one late, you can't be playing for a field goal there. You got to go for the touchdown. Way too conservative. And now it's time to rally the troops. He did it 2 years ago. I asked him about that. Like, how do you rally the troops now? And he said, we have it. We're playing for a national championship now. Yeah, it sucks. We're still hurting about what happened. He called it devastating to lose again to Michigan, but now they're playing for a national championship. Can he rally the troops like he did 2 years ago? I heard somebody on Twitter said, okay, yeah, I mean, it's easier to rally the troops when you have C.J. Stroud compared to Will Howard. And I said, that's fair. I said, but this defense, 2024 defense, is better than that 2022 defense. Can he rally the troops? Can they win the national championship? Maybe. One good thing is there's not a dominant team out there. Now, Ohio State's proven they're not a dominant team either, but Ohio State still could win the national championship. It's not like that would be crazy. If you look at the betting odds, they have the 3rd best odds to win the national championship, tied with Georgia. Tied is the 3rd best odds to win the national championship. They're not a long shot, even though we're still all smarting from what happened on Saturday.
I think what you said there about C.J. Stroud versus Will Howard is interesting, because 2 weeks ago we're talking more about should Will Howard be in the Heisman Trophy conversation. Look, Will Howard had a bad game, and Ryan Day was asked more about the injury and his performances after coming out of the game. Should they have stuck with Devin Brown a little bit longer? He again kind of leaned on the medical team is the term he uses. And watching it back, even watching it live, it didn't look right with Will Howard. And he did start off 6 of 8, I think, before that. And, maybe he wasn't 100, maybe he was too juiced up. I don't think we're ever going to know. Will Howard said after the game that he was fine to go back in as well. So
he threw his touchdown after.
He did, yes. And that 2-minute drill drive was as I think he was 8 of 9 on that drive. So, but if you take that out, when he has to process and has to think and things, whether it was the emotion of the game, whether it was that he got hit in the head, whether it was just the moment.
The early interception maybe was in his head. He made him a little.
Certainly.
Even though he usually does a good job of bouncing back, but he didn't. I'm sure it affected him. It looked like he was knocked out to me. And if you're knocked out,
certainly wobbly.
You definitely have a concussion. Any doctor would say that. And your I almost said wife, soon to be wife, is a nurse. You don't have to be a nurse for a doctor to know if you get knocked out, you have a concussion. I don't know how serious of one, but any doctor will tell you, any nurse will tell you, if you get knocked out, you have a concussion. I don't know for sure if he was knocked out. It looked like he was. He was having some smelling salts on that reminded me of watching like NFL football in the 80s. Guys would get knocked out to be over like, how many fingers am I holding up? 4. Give him some smelling salts. He's good. Like that. But I tell you what, if the doctors cleared him, the doctors cleared him.
Right.
Yes.
And with head injuries, I believe college is the same as most professional leagues, where they have independent people on the sidelines. I'm not 100% sure of that. Hopefully they do, so that you're not persuaded to let somebody, even in any situation, go back in a big game like that. Coach Day was also asked about the offensive line.
Yes.
I thought this was interesting.
Yeah.
He said that they had considered rolling some guys going into this game, but didn't want to do it in such a big game. Obviously, you only have a week to prepare. But that's something that they will consider going into whatever the college football playoff game is. My first thought is, like, what do you do? You're down to kind of bare bones here. Unless some of these young guys that we haven't seen look really good in practice all of a sudden, I'm not sure where you turn. He mentioned maybe moving Donovan back inside. I guess if you got left tackle, who's Zen Mikulski, sorry, brain fart. If you got him back and you feel better about him, could you put him at left tackle? But I think it's interesting that they were thinking about that and that they're still thinking about it, but I don't know what the answers are on the offensive line.
Yeah, to me, it's clear they're not just going to consider changes. There's going to be changes. That's, you guys watch the press conference. Tell me if I'm wrong. It seems like he didn't come right out and say that, but I was like, whoa, there's definitely going to be changes is how I read that. I expect Josh Padilla to be the starting center now. Probably kick. Hinsman was playing really good at guard. Has struggled a little bit at center, even with his snaps. Tegra Shabola has been awful at right guard. Had his worst game of the year. He hasn't graded out well pretty much the entire year, and he was awful against Michigan. I could see them replacing him. Obviously, you're not going to do anything with Josh Fryer at right tackle. So I could see them putting Padilla in at center. He also mentioned Luke Montgomery could be in the mix. There's definitely going to be a shakeup on the offensive line, no doubt about it, and rightfully so. That was a horrific. We can talk about the play calling, and it was. The play calling was bad. The offensive line was horrific, which then those things are intertwined. If the offensive line's horrific and Michigan's defensive tackles are the best thing on their team by far, how about don't run right at them every time? Like, now I'm getting ticked off just thinking about it.
What will be interesting is you won't be facing a Michigan team with those interior. Now, you will face interior guys. How do you learn from this in terms of, okay, maybe this isn't the strength of our team running up the middle, but we know we need to run up the middle a little bit. So how do we spread things out more, like we're talking about, getting the ball on the perimeter, things like that, as they go forward? And I guess that leads into the next topic. Going forward, does this sound, given he's admitting that he needs to change some things on the offensive line, he says he will be back next year, but does this sound like a guy who is feeling the pressure, not necessarily coaching for his job, if you believe Ross Bjork, if you believe Ryan Day, but a guy who knows, hey, we got to get this done in terms of really making a run in this playoff?
Yeah, I think he knows he at least needs to make a run. I think that's you got to win at least 2 games, I think, to be safe.
Semifinals.
I really don't think Ross Bjork would fire him if he won 1 game and then lost in the quarterfinals if it was a close game. But let's be real. Is it going to be Ross Bjork's decision, or is it going to be the big money boosters' decision? The latter, right? I mean, it's and Bjork's very familiar with that, coming from Texas A&M, where he was forced to do things he didn't want to do, I'm told. He probably would never admit this publicly, but things like give Jimbo Fisher that extension, that was the boosters. Wasn't Ross Bjork, hey, let's give Jimbo Fisher an extension after we already gave him way too much money. No. And he didn't hire Jimbo Fisher. He was there when they gave him the extension, so a lot of people have been like, Ross Bjork's an idiot. He gave Jimbo Fisher the extension. That was really boosters. But I don't know, man. I mean, there was a lot of people that said if he loses to Michigan 4th time, he's done. That's already happened. So I think Ryan Day is going to be the coach next year, but they can't lay an egg in the playoffs. They don't have to win the national championship. But I think, like you said, Pat, I think they have to make a run.
Well, it's such a weird situation because this game can't be your end-all, be-all. As much as fans, media, players who grew up with it feel this, and I think anyone listening to this, it hurts. It hurts these guys in the program. Like it is, they keep making this comparison. It is the NFL. You have to get over these losses. Now you have a little bit more time because you're not playing the Big Ten championship game. But I keep using the example. Last year, the Kansas City Chiefs lost to a really bad Las Vegas Raiders team. And that's not the Ohio State-Michigan rivalry, but it is a long-time rivalry. These things are going to happen. And as much as it sucks, you have to get over it from a player standpoint. Fans can continue to be mad for as long as they want.
It reminds me of Duke Carolina basketball.
It's
not the exact same thing. Because 12 teams make the postseason in football now, and 68 make it in basketball. So it's not the exact same thing. But when you consider there are triple the amount of teams, Division I college basketball teams compared to Division I FBS football teams, it's a little more comparable then. Then if you do the math, it'd be like the equivalent of 36 college football teams making it. That's basically how the NCAA tournament is, because it basically is college basketball now, and we're not used to that. But if Ohio State goes on and wins the national championship, 100 times out of 100 would take winning the national championship and losing to Michigan over beating Michigan and not winning the national championship. Banners fly forever. Banners hang forever. Beating this Michigan team would not have caused them to put a banner up. It sucks. I was as pissed as anybody, but they do have a chance. And normally I would sit here and say, guys, yeah, they got a chance, but come on. Are they really going to be able to rally the troops after that loss to this Michigan team? And granted, 2 years ago, Michigan was a much better team. But they did. We saw them rally the troops 2 years ago against the eventual national champion, the defending national champion. They went down to Georgia and outplayed Georgia in Atlanta. I still maintain if they didn't overturn that Marvin Harrison hit, that Ohio State wins that game, Ohio State outplayed them. They still should have won anyway. So I believe he can rally the troops, but we shall see.
Yeah. And I think just this way of thinking about college football is going to continue to change. You use the basketball terminology. I think that's, even in the 14 playoff, Alabama lost to Auburn one year and went on to win the national championship. And if we're talking college football, that's probably the closest thing to this game.
Yes.
I imagine that Auburn fans will hold that over Alabama fans for a long time. You still got the national title. really, ultimately, is that what you care about? The last thing I wanted to bring up is Coach Day talking about the I lost my train of thought again. Well, just anything else that stood out to you while I try and think of that we didn't mention.
Nothing too much. He was asked how much if you started to call plays more. I know a lot of people were wondering, was that Day calling the plays? Was it Chip Kelly? And without throwing Chip Kelly under the bus, he said, the way we've been doing it all year is the way we did it. I'll give my input. He says he does the same thing for defense. We'll flip over to the defense. But then he said, the buck stops with me. This is on me. So you can almost tell, even though he wasn't throwing Chip under the bus with what he said, he almost kind of stopped himself and be like, but it's on me. But if you're wondering who was calling the plays, it was Chip Kelly, not Ryan Day.
Yeah, I think everything had to kind of culminate in terms of the way that this game was handled, and I think looking back on it, we will continue to wonder if if there wasn't this pressure, this immense pressure on them to win. And I think this whole program felt it. I think the defense finally felt it in the fourth quarter, giving up those plays. And that's one of the things I wanted to ask him about. The defense, he said from the beginning, the defense played well. And they did, no doubt about it.
Against a bad offense.
Yes, that's exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah.
The defense, then you have the special teams mistakes. And not only field goals, you had a really bad punt. You had the Caleb Downs letting the ball roll, which was uncharacteristic from a guy who just a week before caught the ball off a punt and returned it for a touchdown. TreVeyon Henderson continuing to struggle in that role, which I'm not sure why TreVeyon Henderson, other than the fact that he returned one, I believe, kick for a touchdown his freshman year in his first game. I believe that was a kick. I don't know.
I don't think so.
He returned one. He's got one return for
I thought they said there was no kick or punt returns for a touchdown.
Wasn't for a touchdown. Sorry, he just had a big one.
Oh, had a long one. He did. Yeah, you're right.
Against Minnesota.
Yeah, you're right.
Sorry.
Yeah.
The decision making there, there's got the fact that they've changed so many times in the return game just shows me they don't know what to do back there. And that's another thing. I asked Ryan Day about it earlier this season, and he said it needs to be a weapon for us, and it's not. And I would say in most games, most big games, it's been a negative for them. The Indiana game being the lone exception. And that's another thing that's got to change going into the college football playoff. Obviously, a lot of offensive questions and things today, so we didn't get to that. But certainly something I think that's part of game planning, and that's part of, I think, being a little tight, especially after you had your best special teams game and who knows how long the week before in the top 5 game.
It's like they put special teams on the back burner. They would never say that. They say they emphasize special teams, but, I see better than I hear, to use that phrase. And it just seems like they don't put enough emphasis on special teams, and it continues to cost them.
Yeah, and if you're doing everything else at a really high level, maybe we don't notice it as much.
Right.
If they had consistently been in the playoffs and maybe won a national title at some point during Day's tenure, maybe we're not talking about it, but that hasn't happened. And so, we're examining everything, and I think that's fair. I think they are examining everything. We're going to wrap it up. Dave has to go pick up his daughter, so we would talk more, but family comes in the way. Thanks for tuning in. We'll have more. I believe we haven't officially set a time yet, so I haven't put anything out there. Bill Kurlick and I are going to do a Bucknuts happy hour this evening talking about the signing day stuff that was, which has, for the most part, been pretty good for the Buckeyes.
Yeah,
not
other
everything's
than
been great.
Naheem offered, but we kind of saw that coming anyway.
Right. So
as long as they got Devin Sanchez, I'm good with that.
Yeah. Check that out later on today. I'm thinking like 6:30, which I know is the same time as the basketball game, but it is what it is. So check that out later on today if you're still looking for more Buckeye talk, because we'll talk recruiting, but we'll also talk more from this. So thank you guys. Thanks, Dave. Talk to you later.
Thanks, guys.